Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Psychocinematic. Today we are covering The Perfect Host, directed by Nick Tomnay. As always, spoilers ahead. So this movie starts off with the main character, John, having just robbed a bank for $300,000. Now he's looking for a place to hide out. He stops in at a convenience store and is immediately already made the victim. Throughout this entire movie, there is this theme of him being a victim and a pawn. He's not necessarily a pawn here, but it is the first occurrence in the movie when he is being made the victim because that woman who was robbing the stores got the gun on him. Now, a writing element that I do kind of like about this movie is the fact that he's already got a wounded foot in the very beginning of the movie, so he immediately is not going to have the upper hand in this situation where he gets caught in this lunatic's house. So after he gets out of the immediate vicinity of the bank, now it looks like he's in the Hollywood Hills, and he goes knocking on the doors. And I think it's so funny that the first house that he knocks on is a Jehovah's Witness, because finally you get to see how the rest of the people who have the homes that you're knocking on feel. We feel similarly, like, no, you're not coming in this house. How dare you even ask to come in? I don't know you. Just a little taste of their own medicine. So now John tries Warwick's house, and in theory, it seemed like a good idea to open up his mailbox and, see if he can use any of that stuff as leverage to get into the house. Great idea, except Warwick's a lunatic, and it made me think, John said he knew Julia, and if Warwick is that crazy, if he truly believes that Julia is a real person, then he might actually believe that John knows her. And another piece of the writing that I really like here is when Warwick is being inquisitive about how John met Julia and what's Julia up to, and you start to think that he's about to catch on to him, which he might actually know, he might not, because he's crazy. But I love that suspense that continues to build. You're like, oh man, the jig's up. Now I gotta pause to say David Hyde Pierce, the man who plays Warwick, is a great actor. He really crushed this role in my opinion. When Warwick gives John the landline, I was like, damn, look at that, a landline. Haven't seen a home phone in a long time. And, I think about this a lot with the movies that we come out with now, with all the use of social media and then iPhones and so on. I just wonder if in 10 or 20 years, all of these movies are going to be completely dated, and there's like, wow, look, they're still making movies about social media. Gone are the days that we even use social media. And I just wonder if all these movies are going to become dated, though I think some movies do require you to use all that technology. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be dated like that, as long as it's not super niche. I think using a phone to call for help is never going to be that big of an issue. This movie, though, you can tell is dated. It's 12 years old, which isn't even that old. But besides the technology, also, I felt like the video quality, I felt like at least the color grade was just a little too contrasty and punchy. Man, I really think this movie is great. They make Warwick seem to be this super caring guy and John to be the one who is in charge. And they just really sell it to the audience. At least when I watched it for the first time, this is my second time watching it, so I could cover it for this podcast. But I mean, they kept me guessing the entire time about what would happen next. And I knew that there was going to be some crazy twist. I thought that Warwick was just going to be a serial killer or something like that. Something else I thought about is, we find out later that Warwick is the police lieutenant. And if he is working that day or getting notifications or on the news, then he would know that they already know what John looks like, the person who robbed the bank. So there's a good chance that he already knew that John was a threat when he was coming in to the wolf den, which makes him that much crazier. Now, shit hits the fan when John hears the news on the radio, and then he sees the photo of Warwick posing with no one. He gets drugged, and then we start to see all of Warwick's friends. And I love the fact that they keep interchanging what reality is for everyone else and then what reality is for Warwick. So at this point, John is tied up at the table, and I'm sorry, I watched this part twice because I was like, what the fuck was that? He picks up the sharp plastic piece with his mouth that's just laying on the table. It looks like sharp plastic. First of all, I don't know where that came from. Maybe I missed that part. But the next part is the real problem that I have, because it's in his mouth. His arms are tied behind his back, behind the chair, and then he drops it in between his legs and then does like one pelvic thrust and somehow gets it into his hands, which are behind his back. I just like I said, I played it back a second time. I'm like, yeah, did you guys forget to add another angle where you showed how he got from A to B? I don't get it. That wasn't the best. I have to say this, the actors who play the detectives in this movie, I felt like their characters or their acting, I'm not really sure what it was just super corny. I hated when they were on screen almost the entire time. It wasn't until towards the end of the movie that Detective Morton became bearable. And it seems like they might have ran out of budget, because at the end of the movie, it seems to only be Detective Morton who cares about catching Warwick. Now, during Warwick's party with all of his imaginary friends, they're talking about the Super 8 footage of one of the last parties. And, they play it for John, and Warwick's got his shirt off and cutting himself, and you see all this blood. And later in the movie, we see Warwick's stomach, and there's no scars that are visible to the audience. And you would kind of assume that, if you're cutting yourself that hard on your stomach, there'd probably be scars, which is the first indicator, I believe, of him using movie makeup and the kind of special effects blood to fake victims' deaths. And I think the fact that he's using this movie makeup on his victims is kind of symbolic of him making the victims believe in something that's not actually a reality, kind of like he believes he has all these friends, not actually part of his reality. Now, when we see Warwick writing out another postcard, it got me thinking that, Warwick might have been super pumped that someone said they knew Julia, kind of reaffirming that he's not crazy and someone knows his good friend Julia. Now, when John plays Warwick at chess for his freedom, it shows the flashback of him teaching his girlfriend how to play, and he starts discussing the pawn. And as soon as he says the pawn, it immediately cuts to him walking into the bank, signifying that, he is her pawn. And later he becomes Warwick's pawn when Warwick takes the money from the bank robbery. But then he moves on to say how the pawn can easily be one of the most important pieces in chess, kind of like how the pawn got the king, Warwick, or the queen, his girlfriend, taken care of by the end. Now, John wins at chess. He's allowed to go free, but then Warwick starts talking shit. So John goes and runs for the swords on the wall, and he chooses the little dagger. That scene reminded me of Scary Movie when they're running away from the bad guy, and there's like a handgun, a grenade, and a banana, a knife, and they choose the banana. And it's like, what are you doing? Take a sword. I mean... Anyways, he goes to stab Warwick, and hey, it's a prop blade or a fake blade. It retracts into itself when he stabs him. And now that's 2 strikes. We're doing like Hollywood level makeup, and then he's got these prop type weapons mounted. It would have made way more sense for Warwick to work in Hollywood and not as a lieutenant. Now, the next morning, John wakes up in the trash outside of Warwick's property, and that makes me wonder, because you've done this before, Warwick, like, how have you not gotten caught? You're not killing these victims. You are the police lieutenant, and people don't necessarily need to know that you're the police lieutenant. But if they say, oh my gosh, I woke up here and this person's crazy, and they describe you perfectly, and they, like John was saying, describe the house, I mean, you're going to get caught. So after Warwick walks away with all the bank money, after the little love triangle for the money, the detective gets mailed a photo of John and Warwick at that party. So the detective is now looking into Warwick, and they talk about meeting for dinner, and Warwick asks the detective what kind of wine he likes, and the detective says red. So he's just going to get drugged again. But then I'm wondering, how do you get out of this one? Does this mean that you are going to kill for the first time, or have you killed multiple times before and just decided not to with some of the victims? I don't know, but it sounds like you're going to have to kill now or get out of town. Not even out of town. You have to get out of the country. That whole last scene at the police station did kind of kill me, because the fluorescent lights were flickering, kind of like the neon sign behind me. But it's like, hey, that's fine and dandy when it's a neon sign for a podcast about psychological thrillers where it's already a little whatever, and this isn't a Hollywood movie. I know their budget wasn't super expensive, but at certain frame rates with certain shutter speeds, you can see the strobing from these fluorescent lights. And it's making me believe that it actually is fluorescent lights, and they didn't use any Hollywood level lights that shouldn't be doing that. If I were them, I would have just tried not showing the lights at all. All right, now for the joke moral of the story. This is what happens when you don't let LA law enforcement enforce laws. You get this dedicated police lieutenant who's acting like a vigilante, taking matters of justice into his own hands through psychological torture. Doesn't that sound about right? All right, now for my review. Rotten Tomatoes, the critics gave it 45% and the audience gave it 55%. I was pretty shocked at this. I thought at least one or the other, the audience or the critics, would have liked it. I could see this movie being divisive, but I gave it an 8 out of 10, so an 80%. I like that they convince you that John is in control and they keep you guessing as to what is actually going to happen and what Warwick is going to do with John after he becomes in control. I like that in this whole movie, John is being made the pawn, and therefore you're rooting for a career criminal to succeed. And like I had said earlier, this was my second time watching it in about 2 years, and I still had a really good time watching it this time. Now, I will say, it felt like this movie was doing too much with the twists. Warwick having imaginary friends and potentially multiple personality disorder? Great. The fact that Warwick doesn't kill his victims? Great. John's girlfriend Simone double-crossing him? It's all right. And then Warwick being the police lieutenant is interesting, but honestly, it would have made so much more sense if he just worked in Hollywood. Those four put together, it's just too much. All right, that's all I have for you guys today on The Perfect Host. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Psychocinematic. If you did, leave me a thumbs up, comment what you thought down below, and then don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one.